Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm excited. This is the first time. Hi, Chelsea. Chelsea. It's nice to meet you as well. I'm looking forward to this. This is the first time I've done a presentation slash conference since 2018. 2018 sounds right. Um, 2019 just was not my luck, and obviously 2020 was fun for everyone. And honestly, I'm glad I didn't have the chance to speak anytime last year because life was just chaotic. So I'm pumped about coming back into 2021, being able to speak, connect with people, network, spread the good word of Gusto and NIST, and go from there. Hi, everybody. My name is Terra Cooke, and welcome to my presentation, Let's Simplify NIST 853, turning everyone's favorite publication to digestible bits and bytes, or as I've been singing to myself as I put this together, let's talk about NIST, baby. And if you know like the beat of where that song came from, kudos to you. I also made up more lyrics to it, but I won't embarrass myself by singing anymore. So with that being said, let's go. So who am I? Again, my name is Terra Cooke. I'm a security engineer acting as a program manager right now at Gusto. But I've done various parts of security engineering and engineering in general throughout my career. I am a governance, risk, and compliance plus audit nerd. I spent about 4 years of my career doing that, and I honestly love it. It's part of the reason why we're here talking about NIST. I used to work in the intelligence community. You can find out about that in my LinkedIn, and always happy to talk to people just in general about the IC world and some of the fun stuff there. I'm unapologetically Black. And the reason why I actually highlight that is because I think it's important to highlight, one, from a diversity standpoint within cybersecurity technology in general, that we need more Black women, more BIPOC folks in general, but an emphasis on women, non-binary folk, etc. Also, just because it's important in the world to acknowledge who I am. Black Lives Matter, Stop Asian Hate, Denounce White Supremacy, all of that. And I'm pushing for intersectionality and equity in security and tech. Super important to me. I think it's important for everyone as we continue to grow as an industry. So that's me. Why are we here? So we're going to be breaking down NIST 853, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology 853, Security and Privacy Controls for Federal Information Systems and Organizations. We're going to talk about the different families. As of NIST 853 Rev 5, which I think was put out last year, there are 20 different control families or categories. What are the definitions of those families, how they might show up for you in work. And I didn't get to how we can audit them, but because I'm an audit junkie, I'm totally down to talk about that later. Answer any questions that you might have and enjoy each other's general virtual company, because that's where we are right now in the world for right now. So why should I know why I care, but maybe why should you care? Despite the fact that 853 definitely is built for the federal space, it's something that you can take and run regardless of your company, in my personal opinion. It's a great way for you to build a solid foundation, no matter your industry as well, to speak a common language amongst the fellow security folks, your IT folks, engineering, developers, etc., because these controls ultimately impact all of us. And I don't know, I just, like I mentioned kind of earlier, I have a very soft spot in my heart for 853, and I think it's a great baseline for folks. So what is NIST 853? So as it says in its title, it's for federal information systems, federal privacy. Anyway, it's in the slides. But it's not just for the federal folks. It can be used anywhere. Its whole goal is to ultimately increase the security of information systems. It focuses a lot on the good CIA triad, so your confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And it also focuses on operational, technical, and management controls. And honestly, if anyone's ever had to print out 853, I think it's 800 to 1,000 pages. So when you think about all that content and the different control families and the nuances and the high, medium, low, whatever, it's a lot. It's a lot. I've been in this industry for 12 years now, and even for me, sometimes I'm just ugh. So one of the main goals I hope that people get out of this is being able to kind of just take it for the tiny bits and can hopefully apply that for themselves and in their job. Sorry, I'm clicking back and forth to make sure I'm not missing any questions. So the different control families, like I stated earlier, as of Rev 5, or Revision 5, I should say, there are 20 different control families. You can also call them categories, and they span across the following. I will not, well, no, I'll read them off. So you have access control, awareness and training, auditing and accountability, assessment, authorization and monitoring, configuration management, continuity planning, identification and authentication, incident response, maintenance, media protection, physical and environmental protection. Talking's really hard, by the way. Planning, program management, personnel security, personally identifiable information processing and transparency, risk assessment, system and services acquisition, system and communications protection, system and information integrity, and last but not least, supply chain risk management. So even with some of the names that you can kind of sort of guess exactly where they're from or what their meaning is, but at the same time, it could be like a plethora of different things. So first things first, let's hop into access control. And as a fair warning, my slide format from here on out is literally just like this. So it might be a little dry to look at, but hopefully my personality shines through and it makes it a lot easier to follow through. So for access control, their definition is processes and controls to limit or detect access to critical information resources. This can be accomplished through software, biometric devices, or physical access to a controlled space. They also had a couple of different definitions. That was the quickest one that didn't take up a bunch of space. So my definition is who has access to something, is that access valid, and why? To dive a little bit more into that, I like always making sure we go over some non-technical examples in hopes that if you're talking to someone who might not be overly technical in your organization, they'll be like, oh, okay, this totally makes sense. So in my speaker notes, I have like your house keys, for example. I have a house key to my house. I'm supposed to have a house key to my house and it's valid. However, when thinking about the example that my coworker and I were talking about earlier today, you may have given your friend a key to your house and like, that's cool, that's valid, but the why might not be valid if they're showing up, you know, in the middle of the night or when you're not home and that wasn't discussed, or even thinking about your Wi-Fi. Someone might have access to your like Wi-Fi, but maybe they shouldn't. Maybe they, you know, you didn't change that default password and it happens. So access control to me is very simplistic. Your who has access. Are they supposed to have that? Or is that access valid? Because you can start getting into authentication versus authorization, which are two separate things, and why they have that access. So that appears with your account management. So in the IT realm, you're enabling and disabling of your accounts. Least privilege, which is the concept of only giving people the access to things that they need and nothing more, to prevent them not necessarily being malicious, but they just don't need that access. And then restricted access. So me as a security person, I shouldn't be able to access, you know, HR file shares or anything of that nature because it's honestly none of my business. And, you know, it goes back to that whole concept of least privilege. I love that access control is your life, April. That makes me super happy to see. Same for you, Karen. So next, awareness and training. So as I was putting this together, I was totally expecting NIST to have a definition for like every single thing, because if you go to their glossary, it says like you can find it there, but then there's no definition. So awareness and training, there's no definition. The way I look at it, it's pretty self-explanatory. Train your people. Make sure that, you know, they are aware of what their job is. So if there's job-specific training that you want for them, such as maybe your developer is doing secure code training, totally cool. That's job specific. In companies, or a majority of companies, maybe not everywhere, there's security awareness training from a very specific lens of making sure your users know what to do when they get weird, fishy looking emails, or in general, don't click that link. So pretty straightforward, to the point, not a big deal. Auditing and accountability. So again, another thing where there's no definition, which is fine. So for me, I look at it as who did what, when, and does it make sense? And I like to emphasize, does it actually make sense of what they did? The reason why I say that is, for instance, the example that I have down at the bottom is your maintenance request. So it is not abnormal if you live in an apartment complex that maintenance has a key to your apartment, if you will. If it's a master key, whatever, they have the ability to enter your apartment. And they might enter your apartment, but does it make actual sense that they did? So you would hope that your apartment complex actually has auditing records to show like, yep, I, Terra, made a maintenance request for this person to come into my apartment, bing, bing, boom. And auditing can also not necessarily be in the digital sense. If your maintenance has to actually like check out a key, you would hope that they have the ability to like pull up a piece of paper to show, yep, they checked out this key, but maybe Terra didn't actually submit the request. So now it's not making sense why this person randomly entered my apartment. Thankfully, I've never had to deal with this, but it's still a thing. And so from there, you can digest like, why did it happen? This doesn't make sense. Now what do we do? Ways it can appear, good old event logging, which is essentially kind of what I was mentioning with the key. Log retention, which is super important depending on what industry that you're in. With us being in a healthcare industry, logs are super important. And then non-repudiation, which is the concept of a person being able to verify that they are themselves without a shadow of a doubt. So things like, certificates are able to do that, even though technically they can be spoofed. Almost everything can be spoofed nowadays, I feel like, but that's neither here nor there. But in general, you want to be able to make sure that I am who I say I am, and we have like no doubts about that. Cool. Moving right along. So we have assessment, authorization, and monitoring. Also, if you notice in the title, there are like the 2-letter, not acronym, but like thing there. That's just how NIST categorizes them to cut it short, because some of these are obviously really long and wordy. So their definition, there isn't one. But the way I look at it is your third-party assessments, your system owner assignment, and your continuous monitoring. So this category to me is actually very specific to the federal world, in my opinion, mainly because a lot of this is around what they call an ATO, which is an authorized to operate. So federal systems have to go through all these different, especially new ones, but even for existing ones, they have to go through different rigorous checks to actually make sure there are security controls in place, privacy controls, etc. So when you assign that system owner, they have to like do the final check to say, yep, this is good to like connect to the network. But I still think it's important, regardless of what industry that you're in, when you have these different systems, applications, etc., that you assign an owner to them, because when things go wrong or left and you need to troubleshoot whatever, who are you supposed to talk to? Who do you run to? As the song says. And sorry, to me, there's a song for everything, so I usually reference music. But also for the continuing monitoring aspect of things. Ways it can appear. So your third-party assessments are your SOC audits, your penetration tests, ISO audits, whatever. Different remediation plans. So once you actually do these different testings by your third parties or even internally, there are things that happen. So you want to have remediation plans, or if you're in the federal space, they are called plans of actions and milestones, aka POAMs. And that's just basically saying, okay, we identified this problem. Here's how we're going to fix this problem. Here's the timelines. Here are the owners, etc. And then various types of routine internal scanning, whether that's, penetration, not a penetration test, something like Tenable or Qualys or whatever it is that you and your company agree to do for your internal scanning tools. That is a way to do your continuous monitoring, which then supplements into your remediation plans, and the cycle continues, or the marathon continues if you're a Nipsey Hussle fan. Do you have any mentorship programs anyone knows of where we can? I am not a mentorship program, but I am happy to mentor someone, just because I am very familiar with the GRC world. So if you want, I will be putting in my contact information towards the end of this session, and we can totally chat. Happy to connect on LinkedIn or what have you. And Sandy also has a good point. So there's that. And also, if there's anyone in the chat who wants to serve as a mentor, please by all means speak up. But I will move on to configuration management for the time being. NIST actually came up with a definition for this one: a collection of activities focused on establishing and maintaining the integrity of information technology products and information systems through control of processes for initializing, changing, and monitoring the configuration of those products and systems throughout the system development lifecycle, which is a mouthful. And also just really wordy and kind of confusing, especially if you're brand new. Even if you're not brand new, reading that kind of made my brain go numb. My definition is basically establishing your baselines and controlling system changes in a uniform manner. The way I look at it, mainly because I bought a house and I moved. And so I think about cookie cutter houses and HOAs. When you are thinking about a cookie cutter house, every house is exactly the same. So you have your baseline in place. We all know what it's going to look like. We all live in our little Stepford wife place of things. Your control changes, however, come into place with everyone's favorite thing, which is the HOA. The HOA is a change control board, if you will, because before you can do certain changes, at least on the outside of your house, for instance, you potentially have to go to your HOA and say, hey, I want to do this thing. And they can tell you no, just like a change control board can. Or they can tell you yes, and then you move forward and do it. And your baseline is, for the most part, still the same, but you did implement a change. So there are some differences where it's not quite uniform. And these things happen for various different reasons and why it might be okay. So I mentioned already a change control board on a way that can appear in your actual technical environment. Change restrictions around least privilege. So that's basically saying, like, if I'm a developer, I may not be able to actually implement certain changes depending on my job, my role, the level that I am, etc. And then being able to take baseline snapshots or just general snapshots as your system changes, so you can understand point A to point B. And then if you need to roll back because, you know, something happened, then you have the ability to do so. It's also good documentation. The auditor in me screams, document all the things. And baseline snapshots totally help you do that without a lot of work, in my opinion, and not a lot of typing either. So checking more questions again, all good there. Contingency planning. Yeah, there's a definition there. Management policies and procedures used to guide an enterprise response to perceived loss of mission capability. The contingency plan is the first plan used by enterprise risk managers to determine what happened, why, and what to do. It may point to the continuity of operations plan, or Cooke, a disaster recovery plan, or DRP, for major disruptions. My example that I like using right now for contingency planning is, about maybe a year, about 13 months ago, I don't know how many of us expected to be living in a pandemic and at home for a year and not having to go into offices. Super fun, but also contingency planning. There are pandemic plans that ultimately roll into contingency planning. So the way I very much define CP whenever I talk to people is a plan for when poop hits the fan. Because that's really what it is. You want to make sure that you as a business have a way of continuing to function as a business. And then if you're a service provider, whether that's a web app, a whatever as a service, your product has a way of continuing if when poop hits the fan. So ways that can appear, which the definition actually kind of alludes to, is a disaster recovery plan, which focuses more so on technology recovery. And then you have your backups around people's processes and technology. The reason why I say all three of those is, one, first of all, it's worth pointing out, which is in my notes, people always come first when it comes to your contingency planning and your disaster recovery, because without people, you're kind of done. So when you do your contingency plans, make sure potentially that you over-index almost for your people, because you want to make sure that, one, they are safe first and foremost, and they're safe. So your backups around people, whether that's making sure, you know, there's redundancy amongst teams who may be able to do certain jobs, your processes, for instance, we run payroll at Gusto, or their backups for our payroll process, as an example. And then your technologies, such as your infrastructure. Do you have hot and cold sites, or an alternative site in general for when things become available, like, you know, everybody being home all of a sudden? And then a business impact analysis, which is basically being able to dissect the impact of when something happens, when it's not available, and what's the likelihood of it, which a business impact analysis, in my opinion, ultimately rolls into a disaster recovery plan, which ultimately rolls into a continuity plan. So they all kind of like build up on each other. Oh, thank you. I'm glad. Sorry, I'm reading the chat, and I'm glad that you all think that I'm a great speaker. And please, if you want to use my definitions, then like, go forth, be prosperous, use my definitions. I think it's super important as a security person who sometimes has to talk to cranky engineers and they're just like, well, I don't want to do this thing. Being able to just talk in layman's terms takes some of that hullabaloo, if you will, out of it, because sometimes just talking technical gets really boring for all intents and purposes. That's just me. So identification and authentication. So no definition there. My definition: who are you and how did you get here? Or in the words of, I think it's Deborah Cox, how did you get here? Nobody's supposed to be here. But it's, again, not confused with actually, are you supposed to be here? So that's what I mean by your authentication versus your authorization. So your identification and authentication is kind of how I have in our examples, your usernames and passwords. So you have the identification with your usernames, your passwords, or your authentication. Multi-factor authentication, it kind of says it in its namesake, but we're talking, our 2FAs, our YubiKeys, our biometrics. There's like a multitude of different multi-factor authentication things out now, which is great. It's extra security, even if it is a wee bit of a headache on occasion. And then your secure shell keys, aka SSH keys, it's another way to authenticate. It gives you a very unique key that you can just use. The reason why I like to emphasize the difference between authentication and authorization is, are you authorized to be here means, are you supposed to be here? Just because I made it to a place doesn't mean that I should be there. And I know I keep reiterating that, but I do think it's important when you start, potentially, if anybody in here wants to do like CISSP and all that fun jazz. I have no certs. I have no patience to do certs, in the spirit of transparency, but they do try and like trip you up on the questions between authentication and authorization. And it can just be kind of confusing, honestly, as you're going through it. But super, super important to make that delineation, in my opinion. Oh, thank you. I will make a NIST soundtrack for sure. That actually sounds like super fun to me. Maybe I'll get a record deal and then I can retire from security early. That would be ideal. But anywho, we have incident response. So I actually like this definition here, the mitigation of violations of security policies and recommended practices. My definition is totally a type of response to when poop hits the fan. The reason why I say it's a type of response is, in my opinion, an incident can become a thing where you ultimately either have to implement your disaster recovery plan, or you may have to implement a continuity plan, just because some things start off really small. And then as you start digging and going through the incident response process, it could just be like, oh no, oh no, oh no, 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 no. As TikTok culture is, and you realize like it actually hit the fan and we need to go do some other stuff and notifications, things of that nature. Not always fun, but these things happen in the world that we live in. In some ways it can appear. We have an incident response team handling a virus or a ransomware outbreak, which seems to be super common nowadays. Either I put this in as a joke, but it's also very true. Long nights on the security team or subsequent teams that are helping each other with the incident. And then just following up on suspicious activity. Just very, in my opinion, incident response can look a lot of different ways. Some of it's very small, almost, as we like to say, keep the lights on, or KTLO work, or other times it blows up in the grand scheme of things. But I think incident response is cool. Seems like a very fun world, so to speak. So you have your maintenance. I think this is very self-explanatory. Any act that either prevents the failure or malfunction of equipment or restores its operating capabilities. It's pretty much self-explanatory. We all have to do maintenance on things, from our houses, our cars, our machines, our bodies. So keep your systems right and tight with regular old tune-ups. Ways it can appear, for me, at least when I think about it, is how some companies do, cycling of their laptops or equipment in general for every X amount of years, just due to being more preemptive on degraded performance over time. Checking and replacing your fire extinguishers, which is also a physical security control, but you want to make sure, if you ever need to use them, that you don't pull the clip out and it's just, because that's not going to do you much good. And then hiring a professional third party, I should say, to check on specialized equipment. That can also blend into the physical security realm for like HVAC and things of that nature. But it's just good to make sure you are keeping your systems like totally together and safe for everyone. You have media protection. There's no definition there. It's keeping your physical media safe is how I think about it. It is also one of those things that I feel like impacts the federal space a lot more than the non-federal space. Obviously in the federal world, there's classifications, like concrete classifications that could totally get you put in jail if you, go and start disclosing information that you shouldn't. And so making sure any physical media carrying that information is marked as such is protected by whomever, or stays in whatever quarters it's supposed to be in, but also making sure that people can't physically like go and pull a hard drive out for us, or for anyone in a data center, for instance. That's super important. Any destroying of physical media, making sure that you're getting it done by like a reputable place, and that gives you like a certificate of, I totally just forgot what it's called, but certificate of destruction, saying like, yep, it's totally destroyed. Or if you're sanitizing it, making sure it's like properly sanitized all the way through. And kind of like I was mentioning earlier, making sure it's marked with the proper classification if you fall into a world or industry or whatever that requires like actual marking and using physical media. Because also, I'd like to say I don't know how many people still are using physical media, but I know it's a thing, so I won't discount it because I know it's real, and I know it's real. Next up, ironically, we get physical and environmental protection next. Weirdly, NIST doesn't have a definition for this. I feel like they totally should because it's super straightforward. And that's protecting the physical space that you're in and ensuring the safety of those things. Physical security is a lot, and it is often overlooked. And I think it's sad that it's often overlooked, and we kind of take it for granted, especially for any of us that are kind of in that, you know, cybersecurity space or information security space, and people in general, just like la-di-da-di-da. But I think the same amount of attention that we pay towards the physical security and protection of our own homes and us as people, we should also make sure that we are doing it in our professional spaces once we can, you know, return back to offices in whatever world that looks like here in the future. But ways that can appear, though, are still visitor logs. Super important to understand, again, who's coming in, why are they here, are they supposed to be here, are they supposed to be in certain spaces potentially. You have your cameras, your fences, your logs, your man traps. There's the concept of no piggybacking, which is when, you know, you got a badge in and then a person trying to slide in behind you, which is difficult being a Southerner and always wanting to be like, yeah, sure, come on in. That's not always good, but then it's also very awkward to be like, hey, show me your badge, to make sure you're supposed to be, you know, or making sure that person is supposed to be where they are. Also making sure that we have protection around power, which is super important. Whether that's, you know, having redundancy in your power, making sure cables are properly protected, your HVAC, no one wants to be super hot or super cold at home, at work, whatever. And then your fire protection. So like I mentioned, I think in the last slide, as a matter of fact, about your fire extinguishers and other things to make sure your physical space is safe. Checking on questions. Yay. Oh, it's Flea. Never mind. I won't say yay for Southerners, but hi, Flea. Planning. So as a program manager, and there's a program management category in NIST too that makes me super happy. Planning is near and dear to my heart. I'm sad that NIST doesn't have a definition because you would think that they do. But you should plan. And that's basically laying down your foundations, documenting and accounting for all the things. Maybe not all the things because that's not possible, but planning is still super critical because it's okay to a certain extent and degree to be flying the plane and building it at the same time, but ain't nobody got time for that after a certain point, and then it just becomes detrimental, in my personal opinion, but that's just me. So ways planning can appear, various different types of creations of policies, things of that nature, your company rule books, just to make sure employees actually understand like the way of the world and how they are expected to function, and that also helps you plan for if there are any violations of those things. And then literally just planning. I didn't know a better way of saying it, but you know, companies have their different quarters and halves and fiscal years and all that fun jazz. They should be meeting together and talking about it, not just at the C-suite level or VP level or the higher ranks, whatever that looks like in your company or industry, but on a team-to-team level. Like the people who are doing the day-to-day work should make sure that they are meeting and planning and understanding who's doing what, because I feel like often there's a lot of overlap, and because there's just no communication, you have a lot of people working on the same thing, and we probably could have reduced the amount of hours or effort that was put into it literally just by talking. Engineers and security people, we have to do a lot better at that. Talking is hard, and it's really easy to just stay in your little hole and not have to talk to people. And that's why some people even join these industries to avoid that, but we got to get over it and grow as an industry, as a self-proclaimed introvert who had to learn how to talk to people. But that's just me, and that's just my opinion. So moving right along. I mentioned program management was next. And again, I'm a program manager. So I think about it as executing projects and I can never pronounce operationalization, close enough. Improvements at scale. At scale can mean a lot of different things depending on the size of your company, because if you jump from, a 1-person company to like a 10-person company, you just grew tenfold. So you got to start operating at scale, because that's what that looks like for you. But it's thinking big, and thinking big everywhere, because you're now talking about a lot of things that are being done enterprise-wide or cross-functionally, initiatives like your security awareness training programs, like continuity planning, like disaster recovery. Those are things that cannot be done in silos. They have to be done by talking to other people. Once again, if you're starting to see a trend, talking is important. But also in general, like creating key performance metrics and different indicators. Some companies have a program management office. Some people don't like that, but it's okay. I think, as speaking from my own journey, this is my first actual real program management position. And I joke and say that I am only a program manager because I'm an engineer who hates when things are chaotic and disorganized. If there are more people who also feel that same way, come join the program management team at Gusto, so we can grow that out, since my boss is hanging out here. But also in general, I think it's great to be able to flex those skills. And if you have management that wants to support actually having technical program managers, so you can utilize your technical skills as a security person, your ability to be able to communicate and be a bridge to others, and then actually get things up and running so they're operationalized and operating in a way that's effective for all parties involved, that's going to be huge for you as a person, the company that you work at, and it's just great all the way around. And I promise it can be painful sometimes, but it's cool. So that's my plug to try and get more people into program management. Again, also not why we're here, but that's okay. Checking on questions. Yes, we are hiring for everything, I guess, so that is very true. Sorry, checking a few more things. Oh, yes, lots of really bad piggybacking things that happen. But personnel security. So the NIST definition is the discipline of assessing the conduct, integrity, judgment, loyalty, reliability, and stability of all individuals for duties and responsibilities requiring trustworthiness. That's a super federal sounding thing to say also, because it's just like, it's a lot to take in, and it might make you feel some type of way as a person. To me, a lot more short, sweet, to the point is know who you're hiring and know your people in general. And it is still good to be able to, do certain things to verify that they are, in fact, trustworthy, they have integrity, they're going to act in a way with standards that align to you and your company. But you still got to respect people's privacy. So don't go like all super deep in that, because privacy is important. Ways it can appear that I'm sure a lot of us have seen, gone through, et cetera, because it's still pretty par for the course, doing background checks, different onboarding and offboarding procedures. And the reason why I say that falls under personnel security is you do want to make sure that they are being onboarded in a safe way. And if for whatever reason things go left and they have to be offboarded in a way that is not your standard operating procedure of somebody putting in their regular 2-week notice or whatever, you want to make sure that people are safe, because that is a real thing. So again, making sure that that's actually happening. And then safe reporting channels for folks, whether they feel they're being harassed or in general, you want your people to feel like they can be safely heard without repercussions, and companies should make sure that they have those things in place. My next super mouthy thing, personally identifiable information processing and transparency. This is pretty new. I think this actually came in on Rev 5, because I'm pretty certain it was not in Rev 4. Ironically, there's no definition of it, but it's protecting your sensitive information from those who shouldn't have it. And personally identifiable information, also known as PII, depending on the industry that you work in, especially if you work in a healthcare related industry or any sort of like banking, things of that nature. What your company classifies as PII may vary. That's just the nature of this beast. And that's where super important things come into play, like data classification policies and procedures so people know what to do with this PII, what can they or can they not do. Having internal and external privacy notices. That way your end users actually know what you're using that data for, and also so they also can have an understanding of the definition of what your company classifies as PII. And last but not least, making sure you have end user consent records and logging. I'm sure everybody remembers the great GDPR of, what was that, like 2016, 2017, in the past couple of years, where consent was everything, and consent should still be everything and always be everything. But that caused companies to definitely start taking a look more at their data, regardless of whether they classified it as PI, PHI, well, they should be paying a lot of attention if it's PHI actually, and should have for years. But it caused everybody to look at their data a lot more seriously, regardless of anything. So that's me and how I kind of think about this particular control family. Your risk assessment. The process of identifying risks to organizational operations, including mission, functions, image, reputation, organizational assets, individuals or other organizations, and the nation, resulting from the operation of an information system. Part of risk management incorporates threat and vulnerability analysis and considers mitigations provided by security controls planned or in place, synonymous with risk analysis. Thank you, NIST. Also, I love NIST. Let me throw this out there, and I love them as a whole. One of my mentors is there, but I just think the definitions are always fun when I have them. So as far as I kind of look at risk assessments is, do we want to do a thing? And if so, what's the likelihood and the impact? That's pretty much all it is. For me, the one risk assessment sort of thing I think most of us do, or at least did before the pandemic hit a lot more, is we all drove cars. And you take a risk assessment every day when you decide to go get in your car and go drive to do whatever. You transfer some of that risk by having insurance, but I feel like you accept a lot of it just by getting in your car and saying you're going to go drive today. So do you want to do the thing, and what's the likelihood and impact? Usually if something, bad happening is unfortunately the way that we kind of do risk assessments, but I mean, they're a good risk and you should still, index for them. So ways they can appear. You can have a risk registry at your company where everybody throws in all the different risks that they have and the likelihood and the impact, and they're assessed, and your what they call risk appetite may change as companies grow, they don't grow, whatever. Doing a business impact analysis, which I mentioned before, under business continuity or continuity planning. And then your privacy impact analysis, which is similar to a business impact analysis, but there is far more focus on privacy controls versus the overall business. So system and services acquisition, there's no NIST definition, but companies eventually, or some companies end up acquiring or a system or a company, and making sure you actually do proper assessments around the system and or company before you acquire it is super important. In the words of DJ Khaled, we taking over. But the ways that can appear is doing a security and privacy risk assessment pre-acquisition. I like to focus on the pre because you want to know what you're getting into before you get into it. But there are some companies that will totally do it after the acquisition in place, and you make it work, good, bad, or ugly. And then doing a deep dive understanding of those system or the company that you're acquiring, what their engineering principles are, how well do they mesh with yours, etc. And then just doing a lot of documentation reviews. Some of that, though, is going to happen. System and services acquisition, to me, is not just something strictly just in the security realm. This is something that impacts a lot of different pieces and parts of companies, because we're talking about finance and legal and security and infrastructure if you have an infrastructure team. So it's very broad, but this is mostly from the security standpoint. Then you have system and communications protection, no definition there. I've coined the new term virtually distancing, which I guess we're doing that now. And so system and communications protection, right? Cool. But that's being able to allow systems to speak with each other, but from a distance and with some sort of understood trust or lack thereof. So we have boundary protection, which is keeping your sensitive resources behind some sort of wall, whether that's a VPN or separate VLAN, whatever. You're keeping it not just out there in the public for everyone to see. Then you have your trusted paths. The concept of systems only talking to other systems that are trusted or have certain networking available between the two. And then your regular public key infrastructure of being able to securely send your keys back and forth to one another, depending on if symmetric or asymmetric, etc. I'm going to stop and check for questions really fast. Oh, I'll pop back over there, because I thought an actual hard question that I don't want to answer yet. Oh wait, did I skip one? I did. So we have system and information integrity, aka SI, no definition. My definition is maintaining your system's reputation and trustworthiness. That's not a good example, so ignore my example. But you do want to make sure that anyone who uses your system, accessing your website, etc., they can actually do the thing. Like you wouldn't want to log into your banking website and notice that it's HTTP and there's no protection, and here you are sending your username and password all willy-nilly, and anyone can sniff that thing out. But on the system side of it, to make sure it's being maintained, you can do vulnerability scanning and monitoring at whatever regular cadence that your company agrees to. It goes back to your remediation plans as well, because doing any sort of scanning, monitoring, external penetration tests, etc., are useless if you are not going to actually take that information and do something with it. And that does degrade at your integrity over time, in my opinion. And then doing input validation. So ensuring that someone's input won't break the system or accidentally display some information that you don't want an end user or in general someone to see. Like, you know, back when you could put in, what was it, 0 for certain things, and it would actually like allow an item to be purchased at 0, but it would send you the thing for like $0. It's fun. And stars and dumping your database. Anyway, input validation is super important, and everyone should be doing it so you don't accidentally break some things or, again, disclose stuff that you don't want people to see. And then last but not least, supply chain risk management. So there's no definition here either, but you want to trust where you're getting your things from. That's really what it boils down to at the end of the day. Ways that can show up is kind of actually similar to your acquisition, is doing some sort of risk assessment for the company that you're using to acquire different things. Vendor management due diligence checks, which if anyone ever wants to talk to me about vendor management, don't. It's my favorite thing. It's not, but it's okay. It has to be done. It is actually very important. And then your terms of services and agreements. When you're acquiring things from people, you want to make sure that we are all good and signed on the legal dotted line, and everyone's on one page in accord. And that kind of ties back to vendor management stuff in general. If something goes wrong, you want to be able to hold them accountable. The last thing you want to do is be caught yourself and are just scrambling trying to figure these things out. So yeah, that's all of the actual control families, and I'm super proud for getting that done in like 40 minutes because I was scared that that wasn't going to be possible. If you want to know more about me, so my LinkedIn link is there, and I'll also put it in the chat. I literally created a Twitter for this because I don't do security Twitter, to be quite honest, but I created one. So if anyone wants to follow me, I'll follow you back and we'll see what happens from there. Definitely love having the social media. I will also be in our Gusto sponsor booth if people want to hang out there, and I can share my information there as well. And then references. I want to highlight, first and foremost, thank you to Women in Tech Chat for these amazing stock photos of BIPOC women doing stuff in tech. I almost cried and got like super good in the heart seeing all these different pictures and not having to like scramble. And they're just very good. So if anyone else wants to be able to have that same sort of resource available to them, boom. And there's a couple others that I can share. Thank you, Flea, for sharing them with me. Obviously, my reference is NIST 853 for F5, which can be downloaded at that link there. And then there's the NIST glossary where I got some definitions, but we got some work to do there, NIST people. Glad to work with anyone. We can work on my definitions maybe a little bit, but I like mine. Otherwise, thank you so much for stopping by at this presentation. I will stop sharing my screen and I will totally go and look at some questions. Wow, there's 43 people here. This is awesome. Cool. I'm going to scroll back through the chat to see if there are any questions that I did not check. Yes, planning training around users and annual security reviews is huge, 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 huge. It makes life a lot easier. Question, what has been the hardest security issues you've had to manage and what did you learn from it? It's not a security thing per se. It is a reputational thing because I think companies and people often overlook reputational impact, and it's around GDPR. I hate anytime I hear that a company is GDPR compliant. Why? Because that's not a thing. All right, I'm gonna throw that out there. It's not a thing. And so having to have the conversation with various parts of companies to say like, hey, this isn't really a thing, and I understand like what you're trying to get at here, but it's ultimately detrimental to security teams, compliance teams, legal teams who have to deal with the request when like people are saying, hey, like remove my data, or what are you doing with my data, etc. I see you're GDPR compliant, and it's just like, oh man. Probably not the best answer, but it's there. Oh, thank you, Mercedes, for sharing my LinkedIn. I appreciate you. What else? What else? As a woman who is a part of the minority in many ways in security and engineering, how do you best navigate the struggle of balancing your knowledge with what follows protocol at your job if they do not align? That's also difficult because honestly, sometimes I've left because it just didn't sit well with me. And because I did start out my career in the federal government, I'm very mission driven. And if I see people and companies doing things that I just don't agree with, I have no problem sharing it, but it's been over the past probably year to two that I felt more comfortable being able to express my voice. Part of that is in thanks to having good leadership at my current company. I give my boss Lee a lot of grief, but it is in thanks to him that I actually feel a lot more safe and empowered to speak up about certain things. But in general, I will stick to my guns and I will continue saying like, hey, y'all, this isn't right, or we should be doing this instead. And some of it does come with blowback of being ignored because I'm a woman and then I'm a Black woman, and that sucks. And I am getting better at being able to find my voice and kind of pull a Kamala Harris me like I'm speaking, or hey, that was my idea, whatever. But it comes with time. It comes a lot with time and a lot with confidence, and I'm getting better over time. I'm super glad that you all have been enjoying it. Oh, there's so much Gusto support. This makes me happy. Scrolling through, checking for more questions. Yes, I will share my, somebody else has already shared my LinkedIn. And thank you, Flea, for sharing the stock photography links. Oh, thank you, Freddie. Cool. I know I still have about 13 more minutes here. I am happy. I will continue hanging out here if folks want to go forth and be prosperous. Check out a couple of the different talks. Shout out to PagerDuty for all the support that we've been giving each other throughout this. So thank you, Lisa. But if people want to hang out, ask more questions. Oh, no, I did not talk about my journey to security. So since we have time, I have been in security my entire career. So that is looking at 12 years, including getting my education. I have my bachelor's in network security. So security is all I've known. Security is all that I've done. I get offended when people ask me like, oh, how did you get into security? And it's like, I've been here. The reason why I've been here is because way back when there was such a thing as dial-up, and you used to tie up your phone lines, and that was super fun when you're in middle school and your dad's at work and he's like, don't get on the internet, or you're tie up the phone lines. And then you would promptly get on the internet and tie up the phone lines. And then all of a sudden you'd be on punishment. You're like, wow, I don't know what I did to deserve this. How dare. So he would go through and change the passwords on the computer, and I would try and spend like a copious amount of time figuring out how many different ways can I back in my way to the computer so I can get on the internet. Which you would think I wouldn't keep trying to do this literally because it would just get me back in trouble. But alas, that's what I did. Oh, hi, Ina. Hi, Jillian. This makes me very happy. And I keep saying that. But yeah, yes, the dial-up noise. So me spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to just back in my way into the computer so I could get back on the internet is how I kind of got into security. Safe to say I am not a quote unquote hacker because I never figured it out. I always got caught up in safe mode, for anyone who remembers that, also with like Windows machines. And it was all clunky and weird. But I was going to go for computer science, and I just didn't because math is not my strong suit in the grand scheme of things. And so when I got the option to kind of like bypass all that math and just do straight up security, I was like, there we go. That's what we want around here. To this day, I still don't math well. Not at all. Subnetting, supernetting, anything like networking related, oof, please keep me away from it. I don't want to do it at all. But yeah, that is my story to security. Been here ever since. It's been phenomenal watching not only the industry itself grow over the past decade, um, but watching more women get into it, watching more BIPOC folks get into it, watching people push back and say and do the right things by the nature of security. It warms my heart a lot to see. I was the only woman in my graduating class. I was the only Black woman in my graduating class. So that was like a thing. Um, when I go poke back at my alma mater, I see that that's changing, and that's good. Eva, yes, Gusto is hiring, and I would also love to be your coworker. I will drop our careers link in channel unless somebody beats me to it, which Ricky did. Okay, great. Let's see. Did you at the end of the session, can you give your thoughts on 800 171? I have to double check on which one that is again. Ooh, protecting controlled and classified information, non-federal systems. So I worked a little bit with 800 171, and it's interesting to me mainly because I felt like this was NIST trying to like dabble a tiny bit more into not just being so strictly focused on just federal systems, but because I haven't touched it in so long. Because I mean, even when you look at the control families at it, you're looking at literally it's all the same control families that came out of 853. And then having the definition of controlled unclassified information resident in non-federal systems. It's basically the government's way of trying to step in and still making sure that their data is sufficiently protected, but not to the same stringent nature of a true federal system, because NIST is a lot, and for certain companies to try and implement everything that is required in NIST, it's just not doable. And so they wanted to give like a little segue. That's my like super quick and dirty thought. I'm happy. I don't know who asked it, so I apologize if I scrolled too fast. But yeah, I have no problems chatting more on that. Any other questions? Which other ones are my favorite? Cybersecurity framework. So the NIST cybersecurity framework, I do like that a lot. I consider it a NIST publication, and I like the risk management framework as well. I try and use both of them somewhat frequently. I sometimes feel like I rely too much on NIST for me not being in the federal government anymore, and so I have to like wrangle in my brain about it on occasion. So there's that. How can you get a can I share them here? I know this is being recorded and it will subsequently be shared out. If you want a copy of my slides themselves, like just ping me on LinkedIn and I will totally share a copy with you. Like I'm more than happy to just share this out into the world. Yeah, for me, it's not a big deal at all. If it makes anyone else's life easier as far as talking to other people, their trajectory and compliance, whatever, then yeah, by all means use them. No need to recreate this wheel or make your life or feel like you want to bang your head up against the wall. Oh yeah, of course it's going to be silent because I'm the only one talking. Sorry, I was super creeped out for a moment. Like, oh, thank you. Thank you all so much for your support. I genuinely mean this. I'm very happy that folks enjoyed it. I'm super glad that people have learned things from it. As I mentioned, very glad to share this out with others. If you need anything from me, my LinkedIn has been shared here. Like I said, I have Twitter that I don't use, but we can still totally connect up there. I'll also be hanging out in our Gusto booth since we are also a sponsor for a good chunk of the day. So if you want to chat more there or in general, by all means, you can come hang out with us. Ricky's also there. Ida, who's also there. They're both members of the security team. More than welcome to ask questions. I'm also hanging out in the Day of Security Slack channel. So you can always ask me anything there. Otherwise, again, thank you all so much. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Be safe out here in these digital streets and otherwise. Take care of yourself as we are still navigating a whole pandemic, and it is a lot to be doing this for over a year now. Oh, how do I wean my cat off of drinking from a bathtub? I just lock him out of the bathroom. He's very angry at me. He was glad today, but he is otherwise pretty angry that I will not let him drink from the tub water. Anyone who has seen, though, he is very well taken care of. He has a fancy water fountain that he drinks out of. Like, he's fine. He just enjoys the good old tub water. Yeah, Tubba is very spoiled. He's a good boy, though. He deserves. But cool. Um, awesome. Thank you all so much for your time. Thank you again for hanging out with me over the past hour, and I hope to connect with you all in the future. Have fun. Stay safe.